Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's APM webinar, Walking the Empowerment Tightrope, with our special speakers, Marion Thomas and Sarah Walton from the Extraordinary Project Management. Firstly, I hope everyone is well, and thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to say a special thank you to the APM Women in Project Management SIG and the London branch volunteers who kindly organised this event. So, I'd like to pass over to our speakers, Marion and Sarah, who, between them, are on a mission to disrupt the project management world by bringing leadership and people skills to the forefront. On this note, I will pass over to Marion and Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for the intro. And a huge thank you, huge shout out to everyone who's joined this. Like you, as Sarah and I, as you can see, are socially distancing. So we're running this from our respective homes. And government health warning, do you remember that amazing video that went viral? It was Professor Robert Kelly, who was talking live from South Korea when his young children and wife came into the background. Well, I can promise you that the same thing could happen here, not wife and children, but actually it could be the mother-in-law on the phone. So quite seriously though, we do hope we won't have any interruptions, and we do hope that you'll forgive us if we do. And it's all part of the social distancing.
I think you should do the cat warning at this point.
Oh yeah, the cat warning. I have a cat who's deaf and he meows very, very loudly. He's asleep somewhere at the moment, but I cannot control him. And if I'd send him out the house, the neighbours complain that he's not socially distancing himself. So as Rob said, we are really passionate about leadership and people skills, and very much so in the context of project management. And that's because Sarah and I are project managers and program managers, and we do spend the vast proportion of our time delivering programs and projects for the various clients that we have. But we're also passionate about sharing our experience, which you'll hear a bit more about in a minute. And what we try and do is focus on leadership and people skills, because we think that's what makes the difference in terms of delivering projects and programs. And at least the people who keep hiring us back to their businesses tell us it's because we make that difference through the leadership side of things. And what we're hoping to do today is to explore empowerment and elevate it into your thinking, because empowerment, whether you're sitting in a meeting all together in an office or whether you're working from home right now, empowering your project teams or empowering your leaders to empower you is kind of really, really important. And we'd invite you to sort of, as we go through this presentation, to reflect on it, take notes of what you would like to bring in differently into the workplace, and think about what you can do right now at this time of social distancing and working from home.
This is just a little bit of a slide about Marion and I, not really a career history or anything like that, but just to give you an indication that as project managers, we have had a very interesting career life in terms of going into virtually any organisation, so anywhere in the world, any type of organisation, and to run any kind of project. So we don't claim to have any particularly technical expertise or particular industry sector expertise, but we just have had the most wonderful careers as project managers, because we've been allowed to go and stick our noses into all these different kind of organisations. So it's really just a slide to show that we have got rather a lot of years of experience between us, and that we've had a very good time being project managers.
And what we should probably add to that, just to clarify, is we typically work as freelance contractors, which is why we've been able to dip in and out all over the place. And what we'd like to encourage you to do is never to be pigeonholed into an industry or a company or a sector, because we believe that project management gives us that opportunity to take our skills that we've learned and apply them, everywhere. And I think we should add, Sarah, that we're both chartered project professionals. So huge shout out to the Association for Project Management in terms of what they've achieved, bringing this recognition of our profession. And, and we are really excited and passionate about being project managers, even though we've been doing it for 30 years. At this point, I tell people I started when I was 12. Anyway, let's get on to the session.
Okay, so just a quick introduction to what this session is. It's about empowerment, and we're going to explore that through the metaphor of walking a dog. What that really means is you get to see lots of pictures of dogs. Because actually what we find when we're running our training program, our mastery program, is that if we give people a visual stimulus, they resonate with the message that we were trying to deliver around that particular picture. So hopefully what we'll do with you is we'll prompt some ideas and thoughts. We do not badge this as a technical training session. It's about giving you some ideas and thoughts and allowing you to think about how you can make them work for you in your workplace. And then hopefully we'll have some fun with it. So what we'll do is we're going to ask you some questions just to get a sense of who's on the call almost. We'll throw out those ideas and perspectives so that you can actually think about how they can apply to you. We'll share lots of stories, or at least Marion will, and I'll chip in a few. And hopefully we'll get some discussion going through the chat. So do please, as Marion said, write any questions that you've got as we're going through. We'll try and pick them up. Ellie's monitoring them for us, so we'll pick them up as we go and answer them at the time, because otherwise you'll have forgotten about them by the time we get to the end. And we hope we don't offend anybody by talking about dogs. We are cat lovers, but just it works better with dogs.
So here we are on to the first question for you guys. So the question is do you think, when you think about empowerment, it's different in the project world compared with the business as usual workplace for the wider business? So there are two options to this, yes and no. I think we're beginning to see a fairly not significant difference.
See the
yes, so 57% have said yes, 7% think that empowerment needs to be different in the project world than the business as usual workplace. And that's something just to reflect on. What is it that we would keep from this, keep the same? What would we do differently? It's, do you actually feel empowered where you are working at the moment? Do you feel empowered when you are working at where you are working at the moment? And the answers to that could be yes, no, or sometimes. And the results are flooding in. There's more flooding than you get at the Eurovision Song Contest. Okay, so it seems to be, for most people, a sometimes, a case of sometimes, and some people not at all. And actually what we'd like you all to think about is, what more can you do to ensure that you are being empowered effectively and that you are empowering others in your team? So as you see, as the presentation progresses, we think that empowerment is very much a two-way thing, and it's very dynamic and it can change. And we believe we all have the capability and choices as leaders to change things around. Thank you. Why does it really matter? And Sarah and I reflected on this a lot, based on our experience of getting stuff done. And we think that ultimately it ends to a far greater fulfillment for us in the workplace. And when we believe very much that humans thrive from connection, they thrive from adding value, being seen and being valued. So what are the areas that we think can really help with? Well, first of all, great empowerment can really enhance creativity. That's really about having the permission to experiment and to know the bounds within which we are allowed to experiment and use our initiative, and to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. So the creativity and the concept of being in a learning organization or a learning project, if you like, is really, really important. And clearly, when we're on a tight time schedule, we're working to a budget, to a scope, and there is never enough time, it would seem. We need to think about how do we boundary how many mistakes can be made and what time we have for that, but how we celebrate them and how we encourage people to put their findings on the table. Great empowerment, it can be very energizing, and it can really increase the performance of the team. And empowering people to set their targets can make a massive difference. Many years ago, there was an exercise I was part of, and it's a simple game where you get a pack of cards, you divide it between 4 people, and you have to, as a group, without saying anything, sort the cards into their suits. And you're given a target of sorting the whole pack within a minute. And first time you try it, you almost get there. The second time you try it, you get there. And then the teams are asked to set their own target. And actually people way outperformed the original targets as they were set. And then the next thing it's important for is growing confidence. So the more we are confident, the more effective that we can be, the more we can stand strong in our power to lead and guide and deliver what we're being asked of. If you're being empowered, it kind of tells you really that someone else believes in you and encourages you to step up. And that again can increase our creativity, our performance and our fulfillment. And the other thing that then comes with empowerment is a discussion, and that needs to happen in order for you to be empowered and for your empowerer to empower you, and equally for you to empower your teams. And the more that we have that discussion, and the more that we build that relationship, and the more that we disclose who we are and how we work and what matters to us, the more that trust builds. And it just is just a positive reinforcement of effective empowerment. It also then encourages commitment. And during that development of that trust and the growing of that confidence, in those conversations, we get super aligned with the goals that we need to be striving for. And it allows that opening of conversation around, are we all heading in the same direction? And one of the things that we often see, and we often talk about in extraordinary project management, about is first of all getting clear about the target that we're aiming for, what sits behind that, what is the big why that sits behind that, and so we're all focused in the same direction, and that then ends up in us working in a far more fulfilled way than we would do otherwise. And once that can happen, we end up far more in flow, if you like. We're connected, we are seen as people, we're valued, and we add value. And it's just a positive reinforcement of all of this. So we are huge fans of empowering ourselves, empowering our managers to empower us, and to empower our colleagues and our teams. And we believe that you don't have to sort of sit there feeling that you're not empowered. You can find opportunities to have the right conversations to build this empowerment and this trust, etc. However, as Sarah's about to explain, it is a bit of a two-way process and a team sport.
Okay, so as Marion has just said, our philosophy on empowerment is it's definitely a two-way process. I think there sometimes feels like I am empowered and it's a fact, and it's a moment in time fact. But the reality is it's an ongoing process. It's a constantly dynamic process. It's very much a constantly team sport. So although our main metaphor for today is walking the dog, we are particularly fond of this image. And if you only take one image away, try taking this one away, of the little girl on the tightrope. Because actually, however good she is at balancing, unless that hand keeps that tightrope at the right tension for her, she is going to fall off. So that's our metaphor very much for team empowerment. Is a two-way process. It is team sport. It's not something you just set up and leave. In order to have your empowered relationship, both sides need to be open to new ideas. So actually you can't be empowered if there's no ability to talk about different ways of doing things and different approaches. We need to welcome and learn from mistakes. And one of the key things about feeling that you are in an empowered relationship is, what is the reaction when you make a mistake? And therefore, if you are empowering somebody, what is the reaction when they make a mistake? Because actually, you can undermine absolutely everything you set up by way of an empowered relationship if the first time there's a mistake, we go back into command and control and we berate people for making a mistake. We need to be clear, and we'll come on to it in a minute, about boundaries, about what is an unforgivable mistake, if you like. But actually, there has to be the ability to make mistakes, otherwise it isn't an empowered relationship. Another aspect is to see a whole person in one another. It's so easy in the workplace to just get into a meeting, start talking about the subject in hand, and getting on with the deliverables. I mean, that is a huge pressure that every project manager works with. But actually, if you take a short while to understand who is this person that you're interacting with, who are this team of people that you're interacting with, it actually means that you can create a much more empowered relationship because you simply understand who that person is a bit more. And we're not necessarily suggesting that you have to delve into all their personal lives. But, you know, we were having a conversation on here just before we started the webinar where Marion was sharing that she plays the bassoon and that she tends to sing bassoon lines to music. And actually, that's not a significant piece of information, but it's something about getting to know something more about her than just what she does in the workplace. Another thing is about valuing contributions. And I'm sure we all find it's really easy to value the contributions of people who see things the same way you do, or who are the noisiest because they force their contribution on you. It's about valuing all contributions, whether they're actually things you don't want to hear or not. There will be value in them, and it's about finding that value and accepting that gift. And then it's about being positive, supportive and encouraging. And again, it's dead easy to be positive, supporting and encouraging when everybody's working well together as a team and it's all flowing. But actually when somebody is, for whatever reason, being slightly obstructive or coming up with different viewpoints that feel like blockers, the temptation might be that you want to shoot them. We've got one client at the moment that we'd quite like to, you know, take him out and shoot him. But actually it's about being supportive and encouraging to what he's contributing and his viewpoint, because if he has that viewpoint, other people might as well. But being supportive and encouraging to everybody on your team is important to build empowered relationships. And then, as we've said, ensuring you have clear boundaries and authorization. So there are some mistakes which are about you have clearly breached a boundary that has been set, and that's inappropriate behavior. You know, if somebody decides to take a decision that is way beyond their scope, their pay grade and everything, then they've breached a boundary, and that is a genuine mistake, as opposed to working within the boundaries that they've set and making some errors along the way. So part of ensuring that you have an effective empowerment relationship in play is ensuring that there are clear boundaries. Now, obviously, when you set a boundary, you set it with the knowledge you have at a moment in time. And on project, everything is changing all the time. So those boundaries will need to be re-established, reset, tested, etc. But actually, if you don't have clear boundaries, then actually you haven't got an empowered relationship. And as with all project work, if you don't have excellent communication, you probably aren't going to get an empowered relationship or a successful project. So, you know, communication is right at the core of absolutely everything we do in project management, but it is part of how you build this empowered relationship. Anything to add, Marion?
Yeah, I do actually. Not necessarily adding to the slide, but there's a really good question coming, which is, can we define what we mean by empowered? An absolutely perfect question, and there is something around being given power, being given authority to act under your own initiative. And I think it can start, if you can imagine, in well, it's in any relationship or organization or what have you. You can have a permission maybe to spend a certain amount of money, and then for much higher amounts of money you need actually to go and discuss and get permission from others. So quite often on a project, as a project manager, we might be able to spend, I don't know, let's say, I'm making it up, let's say it depends on the organisation. You might have the authority to spend £5,000 without having to ask anybody else's permission to go and spend that money. So you're empowered to that level of spend. You might find that in other situations, you and your manager have collectively got an empowerment to £50,000. So it's about levels of permission, but that's in the purest spending sense. And what we then need to do is to think about, well, what does that give us permission to do in terms of making decisions on our projects? So when we're working within the work streams that we might be leading, there are certain things that we're allowed to make decisions about, just to drive things forward. And there are things, if we were driving forward too quickly, we would be off like a loose cannon. And it's about looking at what we're trying to deliver and the scope of what we're trying to deliver, and agreeing within our, if you like, hierarchy of project management, who's got permission to do what and to what extent. Where do the boundaries sit? So hopefully that helps a bit. If we want to explore it a bit more, just pop another question in there.
Do you want to pick up this next question as well?
How can we influence those in our teams who are not empowering to us?
So the being open and welcoming mistakes is something we're not great at, and the result of that is people feel less empowered. And I think,
yes, I
think that is key. Is actually, as soon as you are berated for making a mistake, your sense of empowerment will disappear. So actually, that's a good point to actually foster some more communication and be clearer about the boundaries of, actually, did I breach a boundary or did I just make an error? So it is actually about having the confidence, and we talked about confidence on a previous slide, to go back to the person who is not empowering or you feel undermines your empowerment, if possible, and actually start a conversation with them. And if it's not possible to talk to them, and I fully accept it's not always, it's actually about finding some people in your peer group that you could have that conversation with to explore whether or not they feel you breached a boundary. So it is actually, it's about learning constantly from the people around you and testing relationships. And in that way, actually, you may discover that other people are feeling the same. Now, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but it is empowering to be in a group of people who have the same reality.
I think the other thing that there are tools that you can use as well, which is about setting out your project organisation and what you're responsible for. There's a typical RACI chart: responsible, accountable, consulted and informed, that you can use as a tool to have a more logical discussion about understanding where boundaries might sit. And then there's another thing, which is about being clear about what really, really, really matters and which battles you're going to fight on that. And one of the people doing our program at the moment, for almost the duration of the program, has been highlighting to her management there's a need for a massive test bed, which has been, and she's not been empowered to take that forward and not being given the resource. And she's been very focused, and she's so clear in what's required. And actually, eventually the doors have opened, and now she's been granted that. So it's about trying to be as clear as you can about what your needs, your boundaries, your communication.
That's 5 months of work of her banging that same drum, but she has now finally, despite all the stakeholders previously saying, yes, yes, we hear you, yes, yes, we understand you, it's not translated into action, whereas now it has translated into action, but it is nearly 4 months, I think, of her banging the drum.
So the next few slides may help, hopefully. And we're going to take you through the 5 essentials for effective empowerment, and you'll notice there's a theme of dogs. So having a collective team target, I just sort of mentioned that in terms of making sure you're all aligned around what that target might be and what you need to do to drive to it. And we think this is the essence of what being a great project manager needs to be able to be clear about. And by target, we talk about why are we doing what we're trying to do. This is partly about what and how we're doing it, but more about why and what really sits behind this. What's the essence of what really matters here? And sometimes when you can when you can really drill down to that, and then you can get collectively aligned around that, it makes a big difference to cutting through some of the empowerment or lack of empowerment that can happen. I'm going to tell a really brief story, if I might. Sarah, is that all right for the
I think that would be acceptable. We did promise some.
So many years ago, I was asked to by actually it was Delarue to help them win the bid for the UK passport. Sadly, you might have read about a year ago they lost it, but 10 years ago we were working to win it, and we did win that bid, and they asked me to be the program director for setting up 3 factories, printing equipment, bookmaking equipment, IT, track and trace, putting books in envelopes, which is far harder, passport books, far harder than you might imagine. We realised at the time that we needed to get super clear why this really mattered. And the background was that it wasn't just about winning a contract, making some money, serving our British citizens with a passport book that was valid. It was actually, it was really about protecting our borders as a country. And you may have remembered, some of you, the 7/7 bombings in the London Underground. And at that point, it was discovered that our borders had been breached. And what became the biggest mantra for us on that programme was that our job was to make the world's most secure passport. And by that, we mean the passport that has the best security features in it. And there were about 30 security, well, there still are a good 30 or so 30 security features. And we managed to produce the manufacturing equipment and be able to produce the books that were required on time against a very, very challenging timescale and target, because for a number of reasons, what would have been a 2-year program had to be reduced to 15 months. And within a year of that completing, there's an international group who look at the world's passports, and the British passport was voted as the most secure passport. But we were so aligned around the target of this is about protecting our borders, and we got super clear as to why that really, really mattered. And then that enabled all sorts of difficult conversations to happen, because it was for the sake of protecting our borders, we need to get this boundary sorted out, or for the sake of protecting our borders, I need permission to be able to do this, this and this, or to have my authority made really clear in terms of what I'm allowed to do, what I'm allowed to spend, what decisions I'm allowed to take. So a clear target makes a massive difference. Thanks, Sarah. And then following on from that, clear roles and responsibilities. You know, who's in the lead, who's following up from behind, who actually is leading here? Is it the dog or is it the lady? And using tools like RACI charts can help with that enormously. But also having your project organisation and having a clear governance structure about who's responsible for which parts, what decisions get made in their span of control, what meetings debate those decisions, and how do we make those decisions clearly as a team. And sitting within that roles and responsibilities then comes our boundaries, which you'll see our dog sled team have got a clear set of boundaries here that are shackling them together, and they're clear about what their job is and who's at the front, who's at the back, and who's at the side. And then the other thing we've talked about is having a learning organisation. So that opportunity to learn, to feed back, to review and adapt. And hopefully this dog and its owner is going to reflect on the risks of getting on the wrong side of the big red pole. And then the fifth area that we think is essential is to think about our judgment. So empowerment, again, it's not abrogation of duty. So sometimes people think the word empowerment means that they can dump on their team or their colleagues without any sort of due diligence and care. And clearly we don't want to be in a situation where we're not empowering in the right way, and we have a dog like this one who's clearly taken himself off for a walk and is probably now to shouting distance. So with all of these things, our job is to stop and think and not run headlong into things. We need to use our judgment. We need to engage our common sense and get our heads out of the weeds and out of the detail, and sort of just stop and look around and think about what is effective empowerment in the situation that we are in at the moment. So in the project that we're working in, or within the wider team, or possibly within the business. And one of the things I think Sarah and I have learned as we've travelled through so many different companies and businesses is that the level of empowerment that you might have for an air traffic control company versus a pharmaceutical company versus a company that are delivering social care versus a company that manufactures cardboard boxes and can tolerate waste. They're quite different. So you need to think about the context of your project, the context of your team, the context of the business that you're in, and the governance structure that sits within that business as well. And then need to think about, can you make a container that can allow empowerment in the part that you're within? And we'll talk about containers in a minute, but we've got a couple more questions coming up now.
Indeed. So big question. Do you empower your teams, or do you have them wrapped up in cotton wool like this poor little dog? So your options here are yes, no, and sometimes. And if you're answering sometimes, whilst you're waiting for the poll to complete, you might sort of reflect on why it changes, what changes about it.
And I'll be the first to admit that one of my challenges as a project manager is not to turn into a control freak. I
think one of your challenges is to contain your control freakery. You're always a control freak, like the rest of us.
And I think that is a challenge, because we are being driven to deliver something. Usually, I like 99% of the time, we're figuring out how to deliver it, how to deal with the time scale, how to deal with our stakeholders, how to deal with a constrained budget. So it certainly is a challenge. Yeah. So there's a mix, again, an equal mix of yes, sometimes, and no. And I think the question for the 1% is, would it be helpful to, what more could you do? And equally, for those who voted yes, when is it inappropriate to, and when is it not to? So so that, great answers, thank you. And I think the thing is, these are questions that we would encourage you to keep asking yourselves.
Let's go on to the next question. So this is a $64 million one. Do you empower your leader to empower you? Because actually, sometimes, particularly with a project sponsor, you need to empower them to allow them to empower you. So again, we've got a yes, no, or sometimes as a poll response to that, and then we'll answer the question whilst you're doing the response.
I often talk about how you dance with somebody. Not that I'm a great dancer, neither am I a great singer, but if you are about to walk across a dance floor and dance with somebody, you usually need to give them a little bit of a clue about, you're going to hold hands or not? Are you going to open your arms to them? Are you looking like you're about to, dance a Highland jig, or are you about to do a waltz, or are you just about to shuffle on the floor? And quite a lot of what we do when we start dancing with someone else, on the way to that point, we give the other person a lot of clues, because we need to help them to dance with us. And it's the same with empowerment. So what do you do? Do you empower your leader? Yeah. And again, a fairly interesting spread there. And the question is always, what more could you possibly do to help them? And quite often we forget that it is our job to empower our leaders to empower us. And quite often it's about teaching our leaders that we are empowerable, we are responsible, we are thinkers. We don't stick our head in the sand. We're thinking and considering about how we should most effectively move our project or program forward. So just onto the question, before we're just about to go on to what's the opposite of empowerment, and that is our command and control. But just to answer the question which has come in, which is, how would you encourage mistakes and get the team to contribute and be engaging? I have a really annoying habit for my teams of starting every meeting with some form of what I would call check-in or question that just checks how they are. It can be, how are you doing today? How are you coping with social distancing? It could be, tell me something you're proud of right now. It could be something like, what was the most exciting thing you did at the weekend? And there are, so people get to know me in a human, and we all get to know each other as a team, as whole people, not just the person from IT, or not just the person who's annoyingly asking us to update our risk log, or not, whatever it might be, or not the sort of the geek who sits in the corner who absolutely knows every bit about the technical platform that we're working on. So through connecting as human beings and seeing each other as whole people, we become human, right? So right at the outset of this call, I said, I was sort of vaguely asking your permission that if my cat comes in and howls very loudly, you will not judge me. And this is about how we foster that team building and team spirit. And in that context, you can then encourage people to put mistakes on the table. And quite often when you're offering some people the opportunity to go, well, actually, what went well, what didn't go well, there's a technique where at the end of a meeting you can talk about two things: WWW, what went well, and EBI, which is even better if, which is the even better is if is a way of putting the mistakes on the table, right? And just by doing that, whenever anyone puts a mistake in front of me, I go, this is amazing, we need to celebrate this. And I'm really overt about that. And I make sure that others see that we are overtly celebrating what we can put on the table. Those of you who've seen me posting on LinkedIn, you will see that I often talk about getting the dead moose out. So I talk about, let's get the dead moose from underneath the table, put it on the table, because then we can see it and we can fix it, and we can walk round, not that you can fix a dead moose, but we can walk round and see it from all different perspectives and figure out what are we going to do about this dead moose that's begun to start smelling. So it's a case of keeping doing this, and I suppose it's really a case of educating our teams what to expect from us, and we have to be consistent as leaders, and you don't have to be at the top of the tree to be a leader, by the way, but as leaders to encourage those conversations, to celebrate the failures, but do something with them. And you just have to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And eventually the people will that you're working with will learn and will become part of that culture. So it's about changing the culture in effect.
Mm. And it's also about seeing mistakes as learning opportunities, because we don't learn anything from doing things well or from repeating what we've done before. We learn from making a mistake and fixing it. And so it's about, when you celebrate that mistake, it's an opportunity to learn and become better as a team. But it's not easy to do because there is this natural tendency to want to criticize mistakes. But it's about actually learning to be more relaxed, to be confident enough to put a mistake on the table and observe the reaction you get from it. And if you are the leader, then you can control that reaction. If you're not, then you have to participate in a way that enables other people to learn from the mistake.
And the other thing is to show up as the person who asks the silly questions, right? Because 99.99999% of the time, no question is silly. And again, you can use the questions to uncover things that you think might be mistakes. And for those of you who are old enough to remember Lieutenant Columbo, and if you're not, you can YouTube him. He's that American detective who always has a very grabby Mac on, and he would always hold his hand to his head and ask that insightful question, which actually just solves the murder, right? Or whatever it is he's solving. And we always really encourage lots and lots of questions, and that we have the mantra that no question is stupid, and that sort of links with the no mistake is something, you know, we is about it links in with celebrating mistakes. So we should talk a bit about the opposite of empowerment and command and control, because actually that is a very valid way of managing, depending on the organization that you work within. And Sarah, you're going to take us through this bit of
dog walking. I think, as we said before, both Marion and I are definitely control freaks, and I suspect it is one of the characteristics of a lot of project managers is, if I've got to manage this project, I need to be in control of it. So there is always that sense of, isn't it better if I just lead and control the project? And projects can and do work that way. However, if you look at the picture of the dogs here, the lady in the flowery trousers, or whoever it is, looks as though she's in control of 4 or 5 dogs because she's got them all on a lead and they're all walking behind her. But look at the chaos that's going on behind, because actually she's looking forward and they're behind her, and they don't know what she's up to and where she's going next. And therefore, she's, you know, they're getting themselves in a right angle. If you're leading and controlling everything, are you really getting the most out of your project team? Are you really using your project resources as effectively as you can do? Because in the end, if you lead and control everything, and I am taking this to the extreme, not necessarily the middle ground that you might get to, you are actually then becoming the primary bottleneck on the project, because if every decision has to go through you, if every piece of design has to go through you, then you become a bottleneck. and that imperils your project as much as empowering people. So there may be moments when you do need to have command and control, but actually that needs to be a conscious decision to be in command, and it needs to be effective. So what we suggest is that although projects can work when you're in full control, actually your role as a project manager, and that can be any project management role down the hierarchy of a program. So it can be a project manager, it can be a work stream lead, it can just be the subject matter expert working on the project. The job of creating an empowered relationship is that you create a container and context that the project is working in. So as Marion said before, if you're very clear about what your target is, the context of the project is very clear to everybody. But as you go through your project, you will have moments when there is a lot more uncertainty. And as a project manager or any other project role, part of the job is to create a container where that uncertainty is minimized so that people can move forward. So, one of our favorite images is the person holding the hand with all the lights in it. All of those containers in that jar are able to get on with being just light because somebody is holding them safe in a container that says, right, I understand what you need to do, you understand what you need to do, now we can move forward. And the hand doesn't have to do the lighting, the hand enable the container.
So can I just add to that? So we believe that when you're working in the projects that you're working in, if you're quite thoughtful and careful about this, you can create the culture that you want for your project. And you've got to think about how that container that was being held up there then interfaces with the rest of the business. But you have the opportunity, you can think through how could you create that container to have the right culture for whatever is right for your project. Okay. Sorry, Sarah.
That's fine. And then part of actually working out how your project needs to work is, what are your needs? Because as a project manager or any project role, projects are stressful, and you need to be very clear about what your personal needs are and make sure that they are going to get met, and you can work in a way that creates success for you, creates an environment where you can work to your very best ability. Because actually you are a critical part of the team, so you need to understand what you need personally and as a project manager in order to be able to empower your team, or indeed to lead your team at the moments that leading and controlling is critical. You then also need to consider the needs of your team. So it's your needs and those of your team. So our dogs here are happily wandering along the beach carrying the stick. I think they're carrying it together, or at least I'm going to imagine that they're carrying it together. And either one of them could be carrying that stick by themselves. But actually, by carrying it together, they are sharing the load. And actually, it's just nicer to work with somebody else in tandem rather than always being in isolation. But if you are going to empower your team, part of being able to do that is to understand their needs, because each person will have different needs, and you need to be able to understand what those are. And then critically, going back to the question we just asked you, you need to understand the needs of your sponsor and your stakeholder, because again, the level of control that you need to have depends on the demands of your stakeholder. And here we have a nice stakeholder who's whittling along, walking along, completely oblivious to the world, looks like he's looking at his telephone. Meanwhile, the poor dog has got to go over that pillar, or I'm not quite sure what it is, whether it's a water hydrant or whatever, but the dog has got to go completely out of its way to meet the needs of the sponsor. So it's all about, it's very difficult if you're just leading and controlling and not invoking the power of your team to manage all of these relationships. Whereas if you can invoke the power of your team, then all of these things become more manageable within the context. Right, Marion, so I'm going to hand over to you to do managing the risk of empowerment.
Yeah, so sometimes there is this risk. We saw the dog, didn't we, who was running at a distance across the heathland, and here we've got an empowered dog who's really empowered himself. And so there is that risk, and there is that fear that if we start empowering, if we start experimenting with empowering our teams, that chaos will or may ensue. So what do we do if that happens? Well, actually, it's really simple. We just go back and cycle around the 5 essentials that we took you through. So reminding yourself that never forget that picture of that girl, the cartoon girl on the little rope with the hand pulling it. This is a dynamic process. You have to repeat and learn from it and do again. And you go back to the 5 essentials of the target, the roles and responsibilities that you're working within, the boundaries that you have. You keep reviewing and adapting it and using your judgments. And if you have some parts of your team that are just always going to end up as very muddy dogs in muddy puddles, then maybe empowerment isn't right for what you need them to deliver, and maybe you would, use perhaps different boundaries for them. But it's very much a case of having the confidence that empowerment can lead to that fulfilment that we spoke of earlier. It can lead to a far more creative team that can take decisions and be far more effective within the overall project or program that they're trying to deliver. So have the confidence just to have a go and just to cycle through the essentials and keep your eye on the ever-changing environment. And of course, talk to your team, engage with them, celebrate the successes, celebrate the mistakes that happen. Make sure that you're being quite, I would suppose, be quite explicit that you're working towards a more empowered environment. Keep getting feedback from them, keep getting that dialogue from them. Take the time out to maybe on a Friday to have a stand-up meeting where you literally bring a cup of coffee and a biscuit, and let's just talk about how this week has gone. Have we empowered well? Have we not? Where have we been too controlling? Because the more you can get feedback from those around you, the better. So we've actually got a little exercise for you to do, which Sarah will explain.
Yeah, so we've used the metaphor of walking the dog because we kind of, where that started was the idea of, a dog on a lead, and you can have situations where the dog is leading, you can have situations where the owner is leading, you can have the situations where they've tied it round a hole, as we saw, or where you've let the dog off the lead and it's disappeared off into the countryside. So if you think about an empowerment issue that you've experienced or you are experiencing now, either where you want to be more empowered or where you're part of a team and you've tried to empower your team but it's not really worked particularly well, this is not for you to do now, but it's for you to do after the webinar, is come up with a metaphor for that situation. And in order to do that, it may be useful to describe, normally we would, if we were doing this in the room with you, we'd get you to strip into pairs and actually do this as a team exercise. But it's quite useful to describe the situation to another person and ask them to help you come up with a metaphor. So I'm just going to the next slide and show you some of the metaphors that we came up with at the last time we did this talk. So one of them was the minions. And this came from a group of people who were either students or early career professionals. And they realised that actually they have a team of other early career project managers around them, and they can help each other to empower each other. And that's kind of, it was a very strong metaphor for them. Then we had The Devil Wears Prada. This was a situation where somebody was dealing with a particularly difficult manager and actually not feeling empowered and feeling that all conversations were pretty much dead end. So they were thinking about that metaphor, and it made them realise that actually you can do a level of empowering yourself with your peers around you, and you may not entirely be able to change the leader or the boss's way of behaving, but it can help you think about it slightly differently and think about how you might behave that would enable you to help them change their behaviour. So, I mean, I suspect, quite a few of you, judging from the questions, may be looking at, well, I'm not the leader of the programme and I'm subject to other people's leadership styles. But even within that context and within that boundary, you can actually create a more empowered relationship for yourself. And the final one we got was people thinking about football and a penalty shootout and the fact that as a team of football players, they actually wanted the very best person to be taking the shot, the one who was most likely to score, and that actually part of their role as the team around that person was to empower them to feel successful, so that they were actually having the best chance they could do to make that penalty. So if I go back to our example, once you come up with a metaphor, and it may be a film, or it may be something like the football shootout, or it may be the dog walking, whatever works for you, just reflect then, does that metaphor actually resonate? And could it help you to manage a similar situation? Because that's the objective of coming up with a metaphor, is actually it gives you a stop and breathe and think moment that goes, oh, I'm in this Devil Wears Prada situation. If I'm there, how am I going to respond? Because otherwise you're just responding potentially going to respond in a purely emotional way of frustration. But actually, if you can create a metaphor, it can help you take that breath before you respond. And what we'd really love you to do is share your metaphors on our LinkedIn page. The details of that is on the slide, but it's also in the handout that we'll pass over to you, that is available to you. So it will be really interesting to see if you can come up with some interesting metaphors, and we can start a conversation going on the LinkedIn page with that.
Also, so straight after this webinar, and I'll put my hand up. Ta-da, I made a mistake. I said I'd do this before the webinar, but straight after the webinar, there will be a page on that LinkedIn page. There will be a post on that LinkedIn page that will talk about empowerment metaphors. So we'd love to hear from you. But what is really, really helpful when you do this is to do it through talking to somebody else. So if there is someone else that you're working in a team with at the moment, and you feel that you could share your thoughts around empowerment, then you can talk through the issue. And quite often when you talk through the issue, the other person can come up with what the metaphor might be. It's not necessarily just down to you to come up with that metaphor. So do have a go at this, because what we do find when we do this, if we were pausing now and we were in a workshop room, and sadly we can't be, but we do find when people sit and talk about this for about 5-10 minutes, somehow people get some really great ideas as to how they could try things out differently at work, or put in place a different mechanism, or whatever it might be. So we really would like you to take something useful from this and see if the use of a metaphor can help you, and we'd love to hear how that goes. And if any of you are struggling, just pop a post on the page and we can talk to you about it.
Okay, so there are a couple more slides right at the end which just summarize, and there's also some on useful resources. But actually, I think now we should hand over and just check out if there are any other questions.
Yes.
So, sorry.
Sorry. Thank you. Firstly, for the great presentation. We've certainly got some good questions from the attendees. So I'll try my best to link them up where possible. One person has asked, is empowerment another word for trust? And as a project manager, how do you know when you have the empowerment balance right?
So Sarah and I always discuss stuff, so we're both chipping on this. I don't think it is another word for trust, because I can trust people without having put boundaries in place. And actually, I think empowerment is giving the other person or the other team or group of people a level of power, but with boundaries. And the boundary bit is important, and you don't necessarily have to have full on trust. So I do think they're subtly different. Sarah, what do you reckon?
Well, just reflecting on that is, if you're starting on a new project with a whole new team of people who you've never worked with before, you don't start with trust, but you do need to start with empowerment. So actually you create those boundaries and you build the trust over time, and the empowerment gets flexed around your better understanding of trust. But I think my first reaction is trust is a part of empowerment, but I'm with Marion in terms of the fact that you can have trust and not empowerment, and actually you have to start your project team with empowerment to build trust.
Rob, there was a second part of that question.
Yes, as a project manager, how do you know when you have the right balance for empowerment?
My immediate gut reaction to that is you don't. You're constantly balancing it. And sometimes you get it 100% right, and sometimes you get it horribly, horribly wrong, but you just have to keep working it. What's your initial response, Marion?
You know, I think that's true. It is so dynamic, right? And I think that you have to be vigilant about how, so let's say you're the leader of the team, you need to look at how your teams or your individuals are performing and the level of mistakes that are coming, actually. So I know we said let's celebrate mistakes, but if you're finding that, you know, you've given somebody the authority to go and, I don't know, maybe completely run a test program and phasing of the project or whatever it might be, and actually the budgetary control and the defect management doesn't look like it's giving you the right outcomes that you need, then you need to sort of look at reining that in. So I think with empowerment, you have boundaries, but you always have some measures and some indicators, so you can just keep tabs on, you know, how far things might be going off piste, so to speak. And I think it's having the right dialogue, or the regular dialogues in terms of how things are working for you and for the people being empowered.
Yeah, because just because you've empowered somebody doesn't mean you then turn your back and ignore everything that they're doing. So you still, as Marion said, you've got those checks and balances going on to go, actually, this feels like it's working. I'm getting what I'm expecting. I'm getting what I'm needing, but also having conversations with the wider stakeholder community also might indicate that you might be getting precisely what you want, but nobody else is. So those coffee machine moments when you're chatting to the person who's running the risk register may well tell you that although you're getting exactly what you want, they're not playing the game in other areas.
And I think that's why this cartoon lady, all you remember from today is that hand and that cartoon lady. Then on the tightrope, that's the middle picture there. Just remember that, because the only way that works is by the two of them constantly checking and adjusting, and it's fine-tuning that. And actually, after a while, both those parties will learn how each of them work, and actually the interaction can reduce, if that makes sense. Rob, any more?
Yes, so I'm aware that time's overrun, but we've certainly got some additional ones. This one's around about young professionals. Do you believe that there's any barriers for young professionals and empowerment?
Sadly, I think there is, because I think my personal view, this is my personal view, is that I have got a bunch of nearly 30-year-old kids, and I trust them and empower them, and I think they're amazing, and I can see their creativity. Sadly, not everyone in organisations takes that same view. So, and I shouldn't call them kids, they're young adults, right? And they're young professionals, and they're doing great work. So I know that, and I've had some fantastic, actually one of the best project managers I've had working for me was in his late 20s, right? And I think it is tough to persuade people that you are empowerable, but I think you should have the intention of doing so. And I think increasingly in the workplace, our older generations will start learning that our younger generations have so much more to offer us, because for all the reasons you see out there. Sarah, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that it is difficult, because there is a completely different way of working, and unfortunately the older generation tend to work on the philosophy of, well, this has worked well throughout my career, so why is it not working now? But I think Marion's comment about approaching people and dancing, you know, how you approach them when you want to dance with somebody, is you have to make some effort to try and understand where the resistance is coming from. And I don't think it's all incumbent on the younger professionals, but actually there is resistance, and you are part of the solution to that resistance. And it can be frustrating, and it can be soul destroying, But I'm just going to quote an example. We are now back at a client that Marion was working with 12 months ago, and she was working with a particularly difficult engineer, and I used to listen to her tear her hair out about how he couldn't do planning and how he would change the subject and how he would do X, Y, Z. Not a young professional, but this is a different example. We're now back in that organisation, and he's just like a little mirror image of a perfect project manager. He now brings his work breakdown structure, he brings his project plan, he wants to talk about issues at the right level. And so actually all the work that Marion did with him 12 months ago is now paying dividends. But she never knew that at the time. She walked away not knowing that that had landed. Because sometimes you are making progress on your relationship without being aware that anything is changing, and then all of a sudden you'll get a step change. So it's worth persevering.
So message to our young professionals is get super clear about why this really matters, being a young professional project manager, and just hang on in there and keep being that super professional, innovative person that you are, and navigate your stakeholders.
So what would you do if your team wants to undertake an initiative that you know will not be well received and likely to fail, but you want them to be empowered? Let them fail?
Sometimes that's the right thing to do, because that is a learning experience in its own right. And what you need to do is judge how much nugatory work might happen, what the impact would be on the wider organisation, what would be the impact on them personally before you let them go down that course. You know, it's like if you let a dog go and sit in a muddy puddle, as long as you've got a way of hosing them down afterwards, that's probably okay, isn't it? Sorry, I'm not comparing a team of project managers with the dog, but I'm just sort of using that metaphor. So what I think you've just got to be very careful about, if you know that failure is going to happen, that you contain it in the right way that protects you personally, your team, and the wider organisation. And you know, there are those people that will tell you the success. You know, I think, isn't it Einstein? No, who did the light bulb? Whoever did the light bulbs, the story goes that they had, what, 999 failures before the 1000th was a success. And there are many stories of how that sort of thing happened. And so sometimes actually you can find you can create from things going a bit wrong.
I think also you're in the situation where you may believe something is going to fail, but somehow some magic happens and it doesn't. But it's about going back to the target that Marion was talking about. What is the purpose of allowing that initiative to go ahead? Is it to encourage empowerment, encourage a mistake that you can then react well to? Or is it that actually this could move the program forward and it's just an innovative way of dealing with things? So I think it's all about making sure that you're managing the risk associated with it. And if you can't allow the initiative, then be really explicit about what your concerns are in relation to it and why it's too big a risk. But encouraging they keep coming up with those kind of initiatives, because there will be one that you'll pursue.
I mentioned that Edison created the light bulb. So
thank you. I'm sorry. Senior moment.
One person said, really great presentation. It could definitely be broken into different sections, so they'll be looking out for future webinars from you both.
Please do. We like doing webinars. We love them.
Someone said, is there a difference in empowerment between how to empower sponsors? Sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a whole thing about how you train your sponsor. It's really important, and a really important piece of work to do. And in fact, Sarah and I do have a webinar we can run on this, so look out for it. We'll post about it on LinkedIn. It won't be for a few weeks yet, but we are a bit passionate about how do you train your sponsor.
Because actually I think one of the most critical things to be a successful project manager is to be good at training your sponsor, because actually most sponsors don't have the experience, don't really know what their role is as sponsor, and your role as project manager is to make them successful in that role, because that enables and empowers you to be successful. But it's a really difficult thing to do.
And linked with it, it's about you standing strong in your power as a project leader, and being clear about your values, the target of your project, as in the big why of what you're doing and why this really matters, because you are going into work in quite a challenging way with somebody who's usually quite a bit more senior than you. And on the same project that Sarah mentioned, where I had a senior engineer who I pulled my hair out at for 2 years, I did the same with my sponsor. My sponsor's now turned into almost my best friend professionally, and calls on me to go and do other project work for him. But it was a rocky ride, but you've got to be super strong in why you're doing this and what's important. So look out for a webinar on that. We will certainly be doing that one, but as I say, it'll be a few weeks away because we're busy delivering a program at the moment.
That's great. So perhaps I could finish on this final question. Based on your experience, have you seen a noticeable difference between the private and public sectors in their approach to empowerment?
I would like to say, unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
But it also varies between industry. So it will depend on the whole context of the governance structure and the culture of both the industries and public and private. And I think that there are some very real reasons why the public sector has to be what might feel like overly rigorous at times, and usually it's for a very good reason. When I work in the public sector, I still push the boundaries of empowerment, though. There's still a lot you can do. You can still create microcultures of empowerment, and you can still build the relationships with your more senior sponsors to try and open the boundary of empowerment appropriately. And again, it's about being clear about roles, responsibilities, boundaries, and such like.
I think that's exactly the point, is that any organisation has its own culture and its own context. You can create a mini culture within that for your project, but actually whatever you create in your empowered relationships has to be appropriate for the organisation that you're working in, because if you become too countercultural, you'll just hit blocks everywhere.
Thank you very much. So I think on that note, I'll extend my thanks to you both for giving a great presentation and sharing your knowledge. I'll also make people aware of some upcoming webinars as well that are being held by the APM. So we've got some great ones, and they're being shown on screen now. You can definitely find out more information about these webinars on the APM website. The link is shown at the bottom of this slide. So Marion and Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and giving up your time to give this presentation. And we hope to see more webinars from you in the future. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us today, and definitely download that handout, complete the task, and engage with Marion and Sarah on their LinkedIn page. I believe the link is within that handout document. And I wish everyone all the continued success and keep well in the future.
Thank you so much.